Okay, I would now like to call the February 17th, 2021 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Sure. Chair Kate Collardson.
Present.
Mary Lynn.
Present.
Adam Reed.
Present.
Charles Musgrave.
Present.
And Jim Metcalf.
Present.
And I don't see Kay Vollmeyer yet.
You-
Staff members Lisa Knobloch.
Present.
Annie Noble.
I'm here.
Francie Jaffe.
Here.
Heather McIntyre is here. And I don't see Councilmember Christensen yet either.
But do we have a quorum?
We do.
All right. So the next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody make a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes from the January 20th meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. We will now move on to public invited to be heard. Each person wishing to speak will be unmuted to speak one at a time. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. And you will have 3 minutes for comment. Apologies about the cattail.
I'll start with Leah Yancey.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Leah Yancey, and I work for Boulder County. I'm joining you today because I'm excited to hear about updates on the transportation roadmap that was funded in part by the County Environmental Sustainability Matching Grant Program. And so just excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
And next we have Brian Jeffries.
Good afternoon, board, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. Brian Jeffries, Milano Lane, Longmont, Colorado. I just wanted to put up a question for potential discussion later in the meeting on the House bill regarding the carbon fee and dividend program. There's an element in there that describes eligible individuals for receiving the dividends as being any person who has a valid social security number or taxpayer ID and is a citizen or lawful resident of the US. That seems to suggest that undocumented individuals in the US will pay the costs of embedded carbon charges, but be in no position to receive a dividend. And that doesn't seem to square with the equity lens approach to a number of topics that the board considers. So hopefully that can be something that can be discussed when the representative presenting on that topic comes on. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair, that's all that I have for today.
Okay. Thanks. Next item on the agenda is any revisions or submission of documents. Does anyone have any? Okay.
Well, I'm not sure what that means. I was asked by this board to come up with a way to structure our inquiry about pollinators and pesticides. And I did do that. And I just turned the questions into a really short slide share that I could either take literally a minute to present if we didn't want to discuss it during the board presentation, or I can just I did send the link to Heather and she could send that to the group.
How about we do that during the board section of the.
Sure, no problem.
Perfect. Thanks for doing that, Mary.
No problem.
Okay, so now it is time for general business. I will ask the board members to please hold their comments and questions until the end of each presentation after the presenter has finished presenting. So yes, Adam.
Hey, Kate, regarding the first presentation, I do have a disclosure to make. Do I make that now?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I volunteer for Citizens Climate Lobby, which is part of the discussion in the presentation. As such, I will recuse myself from this portion of the meeting just to be on the safe side. And this is based on guidance that I got from the city staff, which I do appreciate.
Okay, thank you for that, Adam. Noted. Okay, so I will now invite Jenny Black to present on the Citizens Climate Lobby.
There we are. So if we could start the slides, Heather, I would appreciate it. Thank you. I want to first say hi to everyone, Lisa, Annie, and the members of the board, Charles, Mary Lynn, Adam, and Kate, Jim, and thank you for the privilege of being able to make this presentation. So I'm here representing Citizens Climate Lobby. It's not really the focus of the presentation, but it is we who are making a formal request that you consider forwarding to City Council a resolution supporting a national carbon fee and dividend policy, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. If I could have the next slide, please. So you received a information packet that provided background for this request, which I hope you had a chance to look over. This brief presentation will highlight some of the things in that, essentially being an abstract. And it will cover briefly who Citizens Climate Lobby is, that we are moving away from fossil fuels, the need for a national climate policy, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and how it works, and the impacts that we see that act might have on Longmont's climate actions. If I could have the next slide, please. So Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan grassroots advocacy organization which is focused on national policies to address climate change and on developing the political will for their implementation. It's a volunteer-driven group with over 180,000 volunteers organized in probably 611 plus chapters now. I know there's a new one in Greeley. Could I have the next slide, please? So briefly, just by way of introduction, we are all aware that our climate is changing and that increased temperatures are amplifying natural events and destabilizing the environment. Some of these events have hit close to home, such as the 2013 flood, and the 2020 wildfires. They are very expensive in terms of dollars and their impact on property and people. Next slide, please. We all know that a major cause of these changes is increasing levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, primarily due to our addiction to fossil fuels. So fossil fuels have powered our economy until now and have provided progress and opportunity, but it's clear that we need to find alternative sources of energy for a viable future. Next slide, please. Realizing this, we are moving away from fossil fuels. Increased awareness of the roots of the climate crisis has resulted in a flurry of initiatives at multiple levels, shown on this slide, in the last year or so, reaching a crescendo as the Biden administration is moving forward to make climate a central level of concern. These initiatives encompass roadmaps for reducing greenhouse gases, regulation of greenhouse gas emissions, resolutions for transition to 100% renewable energy sources, training for workers in new job opportunities, support for innovation in wind, solar, and other technology, ways to increase energy efficiency and better manage energy sources, as well as support for low-income households to become more energy efficient and rebates for electrical vehicle purchases. Longmont is a leader in climate action, and I'm really proud of that. We have a sustainability plan and have resolved and are working with our local power authorities to have our electricity sourced from 100% renewable energy by 2030. More recently, we've declared a climate emergency which result in a comprehensive comprehensive climate action recommendations that build upon and extend the sustainability plan. The initiatives at all levels in Longmont and in Colorado, as well as across the country, are important in addressing the climate crisis. But the question is how to achieve this transition smoothly and predictably so that companies and consumers can plan effectively. Next slide, please. Currently, there are many players focusing on important issues, nibbling and chomping at the edges of the problem, but lacking is a national legislation which is directly focused on the core, reducing dependence on fossil fuels in a way that establishes a level playing field for action on emission reduction across the country, upon which all other initiatives can build. Next slide, please. So what makes a good solution? First, it should drive large-scale change and work in concert with other initiatives. It has to be big enough to match the scale of the problem. It will work best if people can choose for themselves with incentives to choose wisely, especially because some people really don't want the government to tell them what they can and cannot do. It has to be fair, not pose a burden on those who are poor or disadvantaged. It needs to be durable. That means it needs to be have nonpartisan support so that a change in political leadership can't easily overturn an effective policy. And it needs to be healthy for the planet, the economy, and people. It should not only reduce carbon emissions for a healthy climate, but also create jobs and a robust economy for all. So could we have the next slide? I'm sorry, I was trying to advance it myself and I can't do that. So thank you. So what would meet these criteria? So CCL has been assessing this over the past decade and found that carbon pricing is the most cost-effective tool in the toolbox, and that a carbon fee and dividend, such as the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, is the most cost-effective lever that we have. Review by independent organizations underscores this, and this policy has support from scientists, economists, and businesses. It's not perfect. It's not a silver bullet, but it is the most silver bulletish thing that we have, and it works very well with complementary policies. So let's take a closer look at how it works. So if we look on the, whoops, no, back please. Have a little more here. We need to discuss how it works. So the policy puts a fee on emissions of fossil fuels like coal and oil, and it charges that fee at the source, at the well, at the mine, or at the border. And this fee grows, it starts low and grows over time. It will drive down carbon pollution because energy companies and leading industries will increasingly be motivated to invest in technologies that provide energy with less greenhouse gas. Industry will naturally want to compete by investing and inventing in lower cost carbon technologies, and it avoids restrictive regulations that take time to set in place and require constant administrative oversight. Furthermore, consumers will make choices to move toward lower carbon energy ways to live. Carpooling, electric cars, solar panels, and more are a good idea. They save money. The fee is collected and put in a central location as the Carbon Trust Fund and paid out equally in monthly shares to each individual. Full share to each adult, half share to each child. The government does not keep any money from the carbon fee. And studies show, as we'll see toward the end, that middle and low income households will come out ahead with this policy. Furthermore, those who use less carbon will be rewarded, so the incentives are in place to do the right thing for the planet. It's a simple and elegant idea, and it won't happen unless we build the political will in Congress to make it law. For years, CCL has been building relationships with Congress to encourage our legislators to pass an effective law. We are seeking your support for this policy to build that political will because we believe that this policy will accelerate local climate initiatives. Next slide, please. Excuse me. The ability of this approach to effectively reduce greenhouse gases is shown on this slide. and accelerate the transition to renewable energy supports the core of these initiatives. Acting in concert with them increases its power. As a little aside, the concept of interaction between climate action initiatives is easily explored with a wonderful interactive climate change solutions simulator called Inroads, which allows one to play with the variables. We'll give you the link at the end of the presentation, and we would love to have you test it as a part of your consideration of this request, but there isn't time to do an interactive presentation of it during this presentation. In the next few slides, we will highlight where we see such interaction occurring in some of Longmont's climate initiatives. If I could have the next slide, please. So the sustainability plan has 10 areas of action, and I'm going to focus on the energy aspects and carbon and the greenhouse gas reductions, excuse me. So the directions from the sustainability plan are to establish a 2016 baseline updated every 3 years, and ultimately to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 66% by 2030. And in 2018, added to that was a goal to achieve 100% renewable energy for electricity by 2030. If I could have the next slide, please. So taking a look at this slide from the greenhouse gas report of 2019, excuse me, we see that over 50% actually of the emissions in Longmont result from fossil fuel used as a source for electricity in residential and commercial and industrial buildings, shown there in blue and red. An additional almost 25% is direct use of natural gas in those buildings for heating, as shown on the left in dark blue and orange. And 16% is due to transportation and transit vehicles that run on fossil fuels, the next highest light blue triangle. Replacing fossil fuels used in all of these as soon as possible by electrification of those things shown on the left-hand side, and by using electricity as a source from renewable energy for all of them would have a huge impact. Next slide. And that is exactly the plan. So continuing transition to 100% renewable energy will allow a 50% reduction by 2020, and hopefully 100% or 66%, I guess, by 66% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The focus will be on buildings and on-road transportation. Excuse me, I was wrong. It's not greenhouse gas, it's this renewable energy, 50% by 2020 and 100%, okay, by 2030. So clearly, the ability of a carbon fee and dividend policy to accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy will have an accelerating effect on these aspects of the sustainability plan. The next slide, please. If we look at the climate action recommendation, there are 7 major areas in the report from the Climate Action Transition Planning Committee and the Just Transition Transition Planning Committee, excuse me. Should be Climate Action Task Force and Just Transition Planning Committee, sorry. With equity being central to all. Moving to 100% renewable energy will most directly affect those that are indicated with a bold check, and the thin checks indicate those that would be less directly affected. So moving to 100% renewable energy will make the basis for energy monitoring, management, and for energy efficiency more meaningful in terms of decreased utility costs and decreased carbon emissions. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act would also impact on the equity concerns that run through all of Longmont's climate action initiatives, as we will see in the next few slides. Could I have the next slide, please? So This policy is good for the economy and is good for the people in the sense that it will create 2.1 million new jobs over 10 years in local communities. These jobs will be in the renewable energy sector, but also interestingly will be in health and real estate because people now have more money in their pockets to spend. The next slide, please. It's good for people because it produces a healthier environment. We lose over 100,000 lives each year to air pollution. If this goes into effect, lives will be saved in the future because of better air quality. Next slide, please. And families will get paid. So by the end of year 10, a family of 4 would receive $4,500 in dividends to help buffer the costs of transition. The next slide. Remember that the dividends are given in equal shares, and most, as shown, will receive more in the net dividends than they pay out in increased costs. So the net dividends are shown in green, and they are after taxes. And the increased costs incurred by the fee in carbon are shown in the bars and are due to both direct energy, indirect energy, as well as financial assets, which represents the pass along, if you will, of costs incurred by businesses to customers. The fact that it's clear from this graph that the benefit is greater for lower income households. You know, they will receive substantially more in the cash, in the net dividend that they get after taxes than they will incur in costs that are due to the establishment of the fee. So in summary, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Thank you. So the carbon fee and dividend then really is the strongest tool that we have to keep warming below the IPCC recommended levels of 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees Celsius. It works synergistically with many other climate actions and gives us the sort of silver buckshot approach that will work across the country. Its effectiveness has been recognized by scientists, economists, businesses, and business organizations. And we hope that Longmont will join in its support. Next slide, please. Thank you for your consideration of support for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And we would be happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Jenny.
Mhm.
I'll open it up for questions from the board.
Should we be answering the question that was given in public to be heard first?
Oh, that's a reasonable idea. Why don't we go for that?
I'm sorry. Okay. So the question it was a series of questions actually by Mr. Jeffries. I did have the chance to look up some information on those, and so in the policy in section 9512, which is the one that he was reading, and I really am very impressed that he's reading through this so carefully. I think it's great. And I think that we showed in the last couple of slides that we share the concern, okay, for equity. I would like to call to his attention that in that section, it indicates that individuals who have a social security number or what's called an ITIN number are eligible to receive the dividend. And undocumented workers can obtain and are encouraged to obtain the ITN number. The information is not shared between the IRS and immigration authorities. In the note that he wrote to me, he also had a question about pay-as-you-go and why these were why the dividend was taxed. And his question actually was on the taxation. And the reason is that there is a pay-as-you-go law, federal law, that says that New proposals must be budget neutral or offset with savings from existing funds. So the taxation provides that budget neutrality for the carbon fee and dividend. But I think that we saw on the last slide that we looked at the graph that and as would be expected, the tax cut for lower income households is much less than the tax cut for higher income households. So lower incomes benefit also from their lower tax bracket, but also from the fact that they spend less on these products. And the third aspect of his question, I think, refers to revenue neutrality. And revenue neutrality simply means that the money that's taken in goes back into the private economy instead of being spent by the government. So he may still have other things that are of concern to him, and we'd be happy to try and answer them if he will send us an email. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll hand it over to Charles.
Okay.
Before you start, just one note, we did have Councilmember Christensen and Board Member Vollmeyer join us.
Okay, great. Has Lyle Rupert joined yet?
Yes, Lyle is on the call.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate you explaining it to us. I had a question. This is kind of related to the projections. Wind and solar are currently the lowest cost forms of power, and they're on and battery. So battery power storage is, of course, could be integrated together with wind and solar to help reduce the cost and increase penetration. So all three of those technologies are on very steep cost reduction curves right now. So, for example, solar is on a 20% annual cost reduction curve. And so solar is about 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour right now cost, and wind's at about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And with the projections for continued cost reductions, they should be under a penny per kilowatt hour within the decade. So I'm curious about, with that kind of and batteries are on a similar cost reduction curve, but with that kind of cost reduction and the financial incentives that basically that provides in terms of how much you can save by implementing wind and solar, is it necessary to have a carbon tax when there's going to be huge financial incentives to just switch away from fossil fuels just because it's going to be cheaper? Even if you don't care about the climate, it's just going to save you an enormous amount of money to basically power homes and industry and commercial, et cetera, just with wind and solar supplemented by battery grid storage.
Right. So I think this is an example of where policies can interact with one another, Charles. The carbon fee and dividend has built into it a targets for each year. If targets are not met, then the fee increases. If they are met, it starts at $15 a ton and goes up $10 a ton a year. If targets are met before the end of the proposed timeline on that graph, which I think was 2050, the Act has in it sort of a sunset clause. It will stop. Okay, so it's not going to go on forever if emissions goals are met, if target goals are met. So I don't think that it's incompatible that in fact, I think it's great that the projections that you've been looking at show that wind and solar are decreasing and will decrease in cost as we go forward. I don't think that those are projections that even our local power authorities have incorporated into their budgeting. Okay.
Right. Yeah, some of these. Yeah. So some of this is because if you go back, 10 years ago or so, the projections were much less aggressive, that the cost reductions in solar and wind were going to come down much slower, and actually even batteries as well. But turns out that we scientists and engineers have done a much, actually done a much better job of improving the technologies. And so the projections were way off. Basically, the prices are coming down much faster than what they were projected.
Right. And I think presenting that information to the power companies would be helpful, because I don't think that they've taken that into consideration in their planning. Okay. They wish to move towards 100% renewable, but PRPA has as a, what do I want to say, a backup to have a new gas plant in case, renewable energy does not reach those sources. So
yeah,
I think we're in concert here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, I think you were next.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate the point that that it's an idea that can work in concert with a lot of other ideas, and that it's one of the potential tools. I think that's a really important point to make. One of the things that I'm really curious about, though, is how the decision for let's say the footprint of a particular energy source is determined, and how flexible that is over time. And what I'm thinking about is that for years we've heard about natural gas being a lower greenhouse gas emitting energy source than coal, which it probably is. But of course, we've also learned now that there are all kinds of problems associated with leaking pump heads and wells and things like that. So that if I had set the cost or the tax for natural gas power in 2005, and if I set it today, I'd probably be thinking very differently. And I was just curious how flexible the structure is to allow for us and kind of our continued understanding of the actual impacts of these different sources.
Well, it's my understanding that there is data that is reported by the sources, okay, on the metric tons of carbon that are being used. And that is what the tax is based on. It's the beauty of going to the source rather than trying to figure things out later. If Lyle has any different perspective on that, I'd appreciate him speaking up. I guess not.
I don't know if Lyle has the ability to unmute himself, actually.
Oh, Heather, could you unmute Lyle then?
Yes, I just asked him to. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know that I have anything major to add. It's true that we would be going to the natural gas producers, not to the power plants that are using it. And we would be levying a carbon fee on the CO2 equivalent of the amount that is produced at the well. So if there is some that leaks on the way to the gas plant, that would still be taxed at that level, which is not the same as saying that independent action isn't needed to track down fugitive methane leaks. But the application of the fee would be at the producer's point. The other, to the earlier comment about whether we need this or not, I think that the transition of electricity in the US and in first world countries is going to happen rather rapidly, whether or not we pass a carbon fee and dividend, and whether the European Union passes an analogous one, which is currently being considered. Other matters such as airplane fuel are difficult to transition without some incentive behind them. And a lot of our manufactured goods that have steel production and cement production in them, there's a chance of us both hurting our own economy and also exporting our pollution by buying more things that are sourced in countries that do not have controls. And that's why the border adjustment aspect of the act that we're supporting is important. For countries that do not have something comparable, there will be an adjustment fee for the goods coming into the country to make sure that they can't undersell local companies because they're more willing to pollute in another country. And on the way out, there's also adjustments so that we can compete fairly.
Does that help answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, I think it does. I think my primary concern is that, you know, even if we measured at the source, that our idea of what was being released would be very different because of a variety of things. And I just think it's important that whatever structure exists is flexible enough that it can be updated based on a variety of practices. You know, like there isn't a ton of incentive right now, for instance, for natural gas companies to make sure that their wells are properly capped. And this could be an incentive to make sure their wells are properly capped if they're actually being taxed on what is leaking out of their wells. But it's important that I think that it's a very holistic picture of what different sources are producing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mary, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know why it just disappeared. I thought maybe somebody did that. So it's really great news to see that that the work of folks like you, Virginia, has resulted in marketplace forces creating an environment in which we are very rapidly going to clean energy. And I am inclined to trust the marketplace forces a little bit more, perhaps, in this case. I'm very concerned about the unaccounted, unintended effects of implementing a tax like this, and then industries that, for example, have a very energy intensive product, let's say medical devices, for specific devices or specific pharmaceuticals for, say, orphan diseases, then can no longer afford to produce, and I'm talking about small industries that aren't overall producing a huge amount of carbon, but are, for whatever they're doing, they're producing something that's very beneficial to humanity, then not being able to continue to do whatever it is that they do. And there are lots of different examples of this across the board. And additionally, I am very concerned that the major problems that we have with the fossil fuel production, which are the after effects of closed wells, which then the company goes bankrupt or it's sold, and there's an orphaned environmental issue. This is still an orphaned issue in terms of who is going to pay for those things. So I just wanted to sort of put those concerns out there.
Okay. I think those are very valid concerns. I would like to ask you if the concern about smaller corporations is that they would no longer be able to afford the materials that they use in their production.
Well, yes, that's one of the concerns. And another concern is that they, as we are in the transition and we are still using a lot of fossil fuels, perhaps they wouldn't be able to afford the energy as well. And we're in a situation where if this is a blanket regulation, then it calls for more regulation. And then what little is left of the free market, it rapidly goes away. And I'm very concerned about that, especially since I see the problem resolving itself. People like you, Virginia, and Lyle, and all of us in here said we want cleaner energy, and the market has been responding, and the price has been cleaner and cheaper energy, and it's been going down. And I'm just wondering how much we can continue to trust the market for that. I'm not saying that we fully can.
Okay, so I appreciate those concerns. I think that a part of the answer lies in looking at the interaction between policies. So this policy is regulated toward the core problem, which is our dependence on fossil fuels. There are a number of other policies that have been recently put into place, such as in the big bill that was passed in December, that will look at the issues of cleaning up coal mine areas, okay, making sure that wells are capped appropriately and so forth. I think we can't have just one piece of legislation that will do everything. I think that's really not possible to do. So I think you have, what I was trying to point out is that this establishes a baseline upon which other things are necessarily, okay, will be necessary to build to fill out the whole program. There's no one thing that's going to be the silver bullet in this. Okay. If Lyle has another comment on this, that it would be appreciated, but you know, that would be my initial suggestion to you.
For the small business case, I would just say that this this predictable long-term ramp that's set forth for where the fees start small and increase in a deliberate way that is tilted enough to be effective, but not tilted so much as to slam small businesses into a wall. The energy content, both of piece parts that they might buy and of energy that they might get from the wall plug, both of those will be decarbonizing at the same time that this nominal ramp is going up. So if you live in Longmont and are using a fair amount of electricity, you're already at 50% of whatever the fee is. And as the fee gets higher, the dollar amount that you pay is going to go down and down and down, simply because we don't have much carbon in our electricity. Like that, the same thing at different rates will play out for the piece part components coming in from other countries and other parts of the US that the small manufacturer might be putting in. They'll have some carbon content in them, which will be taxed at a small, affordable amount early. That tax will start to go up. Those individual suppliers will start to decarbonize, each of them as the market makes sense for them. Some will do it all at once. Some will take some low-hanging fruit and decarbonize some of the easy things in the early years to only suffer a small fee burden, and then decarbonize more thoroughly in the later years. But every enterprise is free to look ahead at that ramp with the predictability that it provides and make their own strategy as to when it makes sense to make investments to move themselves away. They can, if they've got a lot of money sunk into something that is a carbon source, they can let that live more of its life and switch afterwards. If they need to replace something now, they can look ahead, see that the price is going to go up for the carbon option, and make the transition earlier. It gives a fair amount of market flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Kay, come off mute.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm just going to chime in with unpopular opinion, possibly, but to the point of saying that, you know, a fine or a fee. And sorry, I missed the beginning of the presentation, but I was in the presentation a couple years ago when you guys came. I'm going to say that if there's a small fee ramping up for a small business, there is zero small fee that a small business has room for. As a small business owner and as a person who I have lots of small business connections of various kinds, from retail to consulting to everything, there is not room for a small fee that could possibly ramp up where they can warm up to it and get over it over time. It's a bad statement to say that small business can afford any fee, period. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, so the fee is actually not going to be on the small business. The fee will be on the at the source, at the carbon source. I just want to clarify that because I thought you were talking about the fee being right on the small business. I'm sorry.
Okay, even if it's a small business that is, if the fee's on the source, then that's going to increase any costs by the source to the small businesses. That's kind of, I want to say, in the end, it could, if it's something that could possibly increase the cost to a small business, it will affect the small business.
Okay. I think that Lyle's point was that, and I'm glad that he covered that, was that the fee will be extremely gradual, okay, as it's passed on to consumers. It will be gradual for the sources, and it will be gradual for the consumers, so that, as he was pointing out, some planning can be done.
I watched a tariff on straws almost take down a friend of mine. So just to let you know, that's how small it can be. And, a 10 cent fee, a 10 cent tariff, a 10 cent whatever on parts or materials that are imported or used or sold through retail or anything to that degree or whatever. This is it. I'm just saying my point of view is it's not something simple or easy.
No, I don't think that I think we understand that it's not simple or easy. It's really something, though, that needs to be addressed at the core of the problem. Okay, and it isn't going to be easy. We all have to work together on that. I do understand that. Okay, but I think that this way of doing it, and combined with the speed at which renewable energy will be coming forth, as Charles' predictions indicate, means that it will move forward very rapidly. It's going to happen, okay?
I'm gonna go back on mute.
That's okay, thank you. Thank you for your concerns. I appreciate them, and I hope that we've helped to answer them. Lyle, do you have anything you would like to add for Kate?
No, I think you've covered it well. We expect energy costs, as Charles said, we expect energy costs to go down, whatever the mix of fossil or renewable energy. We expect them to go down faster if there's more renewable, and this should just help us to make everything more uniform across the U.S. and to not have a local business suffer because their local council has imposed some extra burdens on them to become green faster than the rest of the country, and therefore the small businesses want to locate just outside of Longmont or just outside of Boulder County or just outside of Colorado because they want to avoid those local expenses. This makes it uniform within the country and also as a border adjustment to keep companies from thinking that they're going to be able to gain a benefit by stepping outside the country also. But we expect energy costs to be going down.
I think the border adjustment actually is important in terms of the competitiveness of American industries, so that American industries exporting to a country that doesn't have a similar policy will receive a rebate so that they can be competitive in the other country. And countries that do not have such a policy will have a fee imposed on them at the border that's similar to what our own companies have had to face. It's interesting in the context of current issues that the EU is looking at doing such a border adjustment. They may beat us to it. The advantage, I say beat us to it because one of the advantages of this is that it really will incentivize other countries to go in the same direction. And that's going to help us with global emissions problems.
Okay, thank you. Jim, I think your hand was up next, and then Mary.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I have just a couple of points actually. First, on the costs associated with it, I think that, and maybe this is an issue of advertising. I mean, I think that it's the cost of programs always comes up because it's going to be a hardship for people, but it always assumes that there would be no cost of doing nothing. And that I think that it's important when we're thinking about these things, and again, maybe this is a marketing issue for this kind of a carbon tax is that of course, anybody in Colorado that wants to do business, if climate change gets totally out of hand, is just hosed. Our water system is going to be effed up, and our agricultural backbone is going to be effed up, and our tourism industry is going to be effed up. And that's just an aside. But the question that I had actually was, I'm fairly skeptical of market forces to fix much. That perhaps is just my nature, and I'm not opposed to this idea. But one concern that I do have is that there's a set amount of money out there to get us prepared for whatever future we have in terms of energy production, food production, all kinds of things. And I think that when it comes down to it, the individual choices that most of us make on a daily basis don't have a ton of influence over a lot of the major carbon producing activities of our society. Like I'm using electricity right now, but if I decided to not use electricity today because I didn't want to, produce the carbon emissions, it wouldn't really actually have much of an effect on power generation, compared to like our city deciding that we want to go to 100% renewable energy is going to have an enormous impact on things. And I worry a little bit that taking money at one point and transferring it to the people who largely don't have a ton of control or leverage over changing systems, as opposed to focusing on things that are more community-wide and infrastructural changes, can sometimes fight against each other. So like I see very much that this could be, this could add extra leverage to other programs and could help accelerate other ideas and programs. But from a purely kind of like dealing with emissions standpoint, is it necessarily going to be the most effective use of funds? Or if none of the money, for instance, is going to go to Colorado to develop new wind farms or solar farms or whatever we want to do, or to buildings to help weatherize them better, is it really going to be the most effective use? And I do worry a little bit that there's going to be kind of a competing interest of people getting these dividends, and then going back to the energy producer and saying, okay, now we want you to upgrade your energy. Like, well, crap, I just paid $10 million in carbon fees. I don't have the money to upgrade my infrastructure anymore. And I worry sometimes that there's going to be kind of like these might compete with each other a little bit, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but it's a concern that I have.
Okay. Let me see if I can address at least part of that. Okay. I think that one of the things in giving, one of the parts that you're talking about is giving money back. You're in a way questioning the fee aspect of it. So the fee aspect of it, the dividend aspect. No, the dividend aspect. Okay. So I'm sorry. So the dividend aspect, the money received back, people will have a choice as to what they spend, but I think that going along with this are things like Longmont's education initiatives that encourage people and teach them, okay, help them to learn why these things are necessary. There are also other policies that will help lower income folks to become more energy efficient, things that they might not be able to afford to subsidize that in a way. So that I think there will be efforts to mitigate those concerns. Let me put it that way, okay? So that once it will become clear that we are all working in this together from different aspects. I think that will be extremely useful. So in a way, again, it gets back to the idea of things working together. I don't see it working against, but I do see it working together.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Mary. I don't want to keep stepping on your time. I know I talked a lot. I guess my feeling though is that, like, the people who are responsible for reducing most of the greenhouse gas in the United States are not low income people, And if somebody is living in a crappy uninsulated apartment, then giving them a few $100s of, a year even, or a month, I think it's great. I have no problem with that aspect of it, but there isn't that much that they can do to actually help drive emissions lower, and if your landlord isn't going to insulate your apartment complex better, or whatever, then there's just not that much you can do. And as opposed to higher income people who do produce a lot of greenhouse gases, who don't need the dividends anyway, and or who shouldn't need them, I guess. And I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I'm not opposed to this. I think that this is a reasonable idea, and I think that it could help. But I feel that sometimes these things that focus on like the individual actions, while not unimportant, kind of misrepresent the actual things that are going to help get us out of this rut, I guess.
Okay, so I guess my first thought on that is that this is really a twofold policy. So it's addressing the root of the problem, and it's also giving a feedback to households that will help to mitigate the increased costs. So it's not just a one-prong approach to things. Lyle, do you have anything to add to that? I don't think so. Okay, are there any other questions?
Yeah, Mary has one.
Okay, thank you.
What I'm hearing, and I sort of want to piggyback on what Kay said. Thank you, Kay. You made my points, I think, a little more clearly than I was making them, and also what James has said. I think we're looking at a complex ecosystem, and we're taking, once again, a single variate approach to solving a problem, which is going to which needs to actually be looked at from multivariate analysis, and which is going to have a lot of unintended consequences. And Kay, I sounded like you were talking about local businesses. I was talking about all kinds of niche businesses. And I'm concerned that when we focus just on carbon and just on reducing carbon in this way, then there are going to be a lot of human costs which are going to fall by the wayside. I just wanted to say, there was one other point, but that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Okay. So I think, oops, who was that?
Sorry, I have one more quick question, and sorry again for the presentation, but I'm on the website, and I was say it does talk about the amount that would be given back being, everything put in minus administrative costs. What did you have for your administrative cost estimate on this?
Okay, so that question, may I address, I'm not sure, these are different questions, okay? So if I could address Mary's first and then get to yours, Kay, okay? So let me just put down administrative costs so I remember. I know you'll remind me if I don't get to you back. So Mary, I think that it's not a single focus, okay? It is true that this bill has the focus on reduction of carbon emissions. Even within CCL, we realize that there are other aspects that have to be looked at. So for example, we had 2 or 3 other side bills that we were looking at, the BEST Act and the Use Act, and those were actually, we had spoken to legislators about that as a secondary ask when we talked to them in June, and 2 of those were actually incorporated into the legislation, the large legislation package at the end of in December. The third one is a Growing Climate Solution Act, which would, it's a very good thing, I think, which would give farmers information that would allow them to be able to calculate the amount of carbon that they are sequestering, and therefore they would be able to benefit from those other legislative pieces that have come back that would, including actually part of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, that would give rebates based on that ability to sequester carbon. So it isn't a one, it can't be a one solution. There have to be many solutions, and I agree with you on that entirely. So, Kay, getting to your question about administrative costs, I think that's a very good one, and I think I can answer that one. So it is realized that we will have administrative costs, and this will be considerably lower than in any sort of regulatory mechanism where you have to set up a new administrative structure and continue to follow out, okay, and oversight. So the administration of this will be taking place through the IRS, and so a large part of the administrative structure is already in place. It is anticipated that 8% of the fees collected will be used in the first 2 or 3 years, and then the amount that is allowed for administrative costs can be no more than 2% after that period in time. Does that answer the question? I can't. I'm sorry, you're muted.
I was looking for more of a dollar amount.
I don't have that dollar amount, but I'll try and get to you based on estimates of what the dividend would be. Okay.
Okay, because I would say the 8% of it, I'm assuming there's a assumed amount that would be generated that gave you the 8% that allowed you to take it down to 2%. But
yeah, I will look into those numbers. I don't have them at the top of my head right now, and I will get them to you. Okay.
Okay.
But it's a small percentage of the intake of the fees. That's the point that I was making, and it drops down.
Okay, does anybody else have questions? This is a great discussion. Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for all your concerns. I really appreciate them.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Lyle. This is a great presentation. I definitely have a much better understanding of the way this works than I did after the presentation last year. So, so thank you. And in the interest of time, at 4 o'clock, we'll move on in our agenda. And
may I, Kate,
yes.
if Heather can put up the last slide, which the slide after the thank you, which has on it the link for the Inroads program. Okay, so at the bottom, oh, there it is. At the bottom of the slide, it shows the Inroads program. It's a lot of fun to play with. It's a little bit like a game. And if you go there, if you go to this website, you'll have access to it, and you can work with it. And as I said, if you would like a presentation on this, we'd be more than happy to arrange one for you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this to you in a more formal way.
Yes, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in really quick, Jenny, before you leave? I know you all have been really patient all of last year in getting back on the agenda. And I just wanted to know, kind of to close the loop on this, what are you all looking for, or what does the board want to look for in terms of next steps? Because I know what CCL had been looking for was for the board to take a resolution or to support City Council taking up a resolution supporting the carbon fee and dividend. So is that something the board feels prepared to take a vote on? Do you all want to think about it and have CCL come back at another meeting? So I don't want to leave CCL hanging, because I know they've been trying to bring that specific request back, and last time the board said we need more information, and so they brought back into this more in-depth presentation. So I just want to put that out there before we let Jenny go.
Okay,
thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you steering us back in the right direction. Jim, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, now that you guys haven't heard me talk enough yet, but I for one would like to, in terms of like supporting a resolution or not to the City Council. I'm not sure I'd want to do a vote on it today, but I certainly would like to put it on the agenda for next meeting. I think that the discussion today really invigorated me, and I'd like to sit with it for a minute. And but I think the idea of putting an actual vote on the calendar is a very good idea.
Okay.
Does anyone disagree with that plan? Okay. So
May I?
Yes, Jenny,
Okay.
yes.
So what I would like to say definitely is that if anybody has any questions that come up in your mind as you are considering this, or as you're playing with En-ROADS, which I assume you might be doing because it's fun, we'd really be very happy to try and answer those questions. So if you want to email them to me, that would be appreciated, and then we'll have a chance to discuss that in more detail. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we do that with like the free information and the openness stuff? Can we, if we wanted to email Jenny and ask questions, is that allowable, or do we have to do it through Heather?
If you
Yes.
do one-on-one, you can do it.
Yeah.
That's right.
You just can't do it with more than 2 board members on an email.
Yeah.
But if we wanted the whole board to be on the loop on the question, we could, in theory, send the question to Heather, and is that the right path? And then she could email the rest of the board.
Yeah, Heather and myself, and then we can, what maybe we could do is collect any questions and send them to Jenny, and she can write responses, and we can get them back out prior to the next meeting.
Okay. So I feel like we should put a deadline on that. So does 2 weeks seem reasonable? Okay, please have your questions to Heather within 2 weeks, and that gives CCL adequate time to respond. Does that work for you, Jenny?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then one also thing of note, I'll just email you guys that link that she just shared with us so that you all can play with that tool as well.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. Thanks again for taking us back there, Lisa. And now we're going to hear about the transportation roadmap from Francie Jaffe and Phil Greenwald. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Members of the board, my name is Francie Jaffe. I'm the Water Conservation Sustainability Specialist. It will actually just be me today. Phil had a last minute thing he had to go do, but if you have any questions for him that I can't answer, I have promised to send them to him, and so we'll get them answered. But we have a presentation. If Heather, you can pull it up. Thank you. Heather, we're seeing the presenter view.
Sorry, give me one moment here. I had it set up earlier.
Yeah. Well, while Heather's pulling that up, I believe our consultant that we were working with, SRD Consulting, who also worked, if you could go back a couple slides, and spoke to, I think, introduced this equitable carbon-free transportation roadmap to the board this past summer to get some initial feedback. We have since, we worked with them throughout the summer. They developed a much larger draft. Since then, city staff has worked to consolidate their much larger draft into a kind of a smaller action plan that ties a little bit better to city guiding plans. So that's why I'm coming back to you all instead of the consultants, but the consultants and their work did contribute to this final plan, which the draft was included in the board packet. Next. So the equitable carbon-free transportation roadmap, our goal wasn't to create just another guiding plan. These are just a couple, but we have the Envision Multimodal and Comprehensive Plan, we have the Sustainability Plan, we have our Climate Action Recommendations Report, we have our Parks and Recommendations Report, we have a number of guiding strategies that have been passed in the past years that have strategies towards transportation goals or improving equity in our community. And what we wanted to do is pull out the different strategies that are tied to whether equity or transportation, and create some more detailed steps of how we meet those different strategies. Next slide. So the main goals of this roadmap was to reduce emissions. The city does have greenhouse gas emission goals that actually Ginny highlighted in her presentation: increase vehicle electrification, reduce single occupancy and vehicle miles traveled, as electrification of vehicles is one solution, but multimodal transportation and access to different types of transportation are other ways, and then also increase air quality and help improve local health. Next slide. So we had these 7 guiding principles that were helping to guide our work. The bottom 4 were our equity priorities. So these focused on building a connected community, including making sure different cultures and abilities were being included in our different resources, addressing cost barriers, and addressing perceived and actual safety issues. These were essentially the guiding foundation that worked together with these base strategies: shortening, reducing the number of trips, shifting modes, and reducing vehicle transmissions, that kind of guided the different steps that are working. And they're all interlocking because we really wanted to highlight that it's not equity over here or shift modes over here and reduce EVs over here. It's all intertwined, and they're all different lenses with kind of equity building up as a foundation. Next slide. So we're working to develop a more beautiful roadmap image that can help guide this work. But this is kind of fills in my attempt to highlight kind of the different timelines, and we just wanted to pull out a couple of the different next steps. These are not all of them are included in the packet, but kind of starting in the upper left, we have some things that we're already doing. The city already has EV charging stations. We are already doing work to move towards zero deaths and address street safety. A big focus we think should occur over the next 2 years is really on embedding equity, looking at our investments in infrastructure to make sure we're not prioritizing one part of the community over the other, looking to hire a cultural broker who can really increase our education engagement. Transit education is one of those. Another one two others I want to highlight is the zero emission first fleet, really trying to look at our policies internally to kind of, when possible, have zero emission vehicles first. And then also there's the Go EV resolution. This is a resolution that has been going around to different Colorado cities. We think it could be beneficial to bring a resolution to City Council that's more City of Longmont adapted, that kind of fits with our goals as a community and kind of establishes that. Then on the longer, kind of the 5-year timeline looking into 2026, this is starting to look at more kind of infrastructure projects, a new transit hub, when bus rapid transit, really working to continue to expand EV education. And then the next 2 are kind of on much longer timelines. And these don't mean we won't start working on these now, but this is when we expect the enhanced multi-use corridor plan to be completed. This is when we expect, if we're working towards more accessible bus routes that reach all of our community, that might be fully completed. Same with a fully interconnected and safe bike system. That one you may recognize as that came from the Climate Action Task Force, as well as maybe looking into really pushing for electric vehicles with like a replace your ride program. Next. So our request for the board this evening, of course, feel free to ask questions, but we plan to go to City Council on April 6th. So we would, we have these 3 requests. If the board would like to recommend that City Council accept the transportation roadmap recommendations as is, recommend that City Council accept the roadmap with additional feedback or direction, and recommend that City Council not take action on the roadmap at this time, that it's not the right timing, that it needs to be maybe reevaluated. I do want to highlight that we've already been to the Transportation Advisory Board and they have recommended additional feedback. So, and we haven't had a chance to update that into the current version that this board has seen. So already there, we wanted to get feedback from all boards on the initial draft and move forward from there. So, but I did want to make a note that the Transportation Advisory Board has provided certain feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Francie. Charles.
Thank you, Francie. First, I had a quick question. Is there a requirement we disclose any kind of financial conflicts of interest? You know, Heather.
Sorry, I missed the question.
So, for example, let's say a board member has a substantial investment in a, that is related to this topic. Would that need to be disclosed, or should they recuse themselves?
Yes, it would be best if you recuse yourself from the conversation.
I will recuse myself then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Mary.
Okay, so I apologize if this question seems like it's out of left field, but maybe Francie, you can show me where I can answer this question for myself. I heard a very interesting interview with folks involved with transportation planning in Denver, who were who had there was an independent group that had gone out and sort of done a study sort of after the fact and found out that the addition of bike lanes was creating greater congestion, more cars sitting in traffic, and that the bicyclists weren't using the bike lanes, they were primarily using the bus lanes. And that made me think, wow, I would like to review more fully the analyses, not just the plans, but the analyses of functional use at this time for improvements of that type that have been made in the city of Longmont. And I'm wondering if there have been any independent analyses and where I could find that critique. And I will, we don't have to discuss it here. I would just like to have that information. You could even email it to me.
I will reach out to Phil Greenwald because that is a perfect question to our transportation planners and our transportation engineers.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Polly, Jim, and then Adam.
I think that's a terrific report, Francie. I do think that there's a lack of any kind of discussion of we have, internal around Longmont transportation, but we also, a huge proportion of the population leaves town every day and comes back to get jobs. We really need to be advocating for mass public transportation, and that would be trains, because buses are not rapid transportation. I've driven a bus, and I can tell you it's anything that's still on the road, including electric vehicles, is not going to, it makes a difference, but it doesn't make enough of a difference going in the future. We need to advocate for mass public transportation, and that would be trains or something that takes the place of trains on a discrete track that is off the highways, because we cannot possibly build enough roads or fuel and get enough vehicles going that will solve the problems of traffic. We need to have people using public transportation, because we are now changing it was really difficult in Colorado because we just don't have enough riders, really, essentially. We don't have the mass that other large areas do, but we're getting there. And the governor recognizes this, and now it's time to get on board with the idea of a rapid mass transit from Pueblo to Fort Collins, and also RTD to finish what they started, the fast tracks. So I would think about, and talk to Phil Greenwald about this, think about putting some element of rapid mass transit in that report.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, actually, that kind of relates. I was just curious if this has been altered at all with Governor Polis's recent kind of reprioritization of the fast tracks. It seems just like over the last 2 weeks, something that was supposed to not come until what 40 something is all of a sudden being prioritized again. I didn't know if you guys have had a chance to actually digest and incorporate any of that, and I was just curious if it had been.
No, if it's happened in the past 2 weeks, we have not had a chance to digest and integrate that, but I'll make a note of that. We did try to highlight in this document the state goals, so we can provide an update into that state goal section.
Thank you. Adam?
At the bottom.
Great, I got it. I think it wasn't allowing me to unmute myself. My question is also related to mass transit. Before COVID, that was something I relied on heavily for both when I was in school as well as when I worked outside of school. And so I think that's really important. And as I took the bus frequently, I got some sense of what the ridership was. But just more generally, I would like to know if there's some quantitative understanding of what the breakdowns are for the types of commuters out there. And perhaps even more generally, like the type of traffic. And I'm imagining there's 3 different types or 3 categories. One is commuters that are traveling around within the city of Longmont, commuters that travel from Longmont to another city, and then traffic that just simply passes through Longmont. And I think it would be helpful to see some quantitative breakdown of that information to help inform some of the choices for the transportation roadmap. And maybe I should just focus the question is there any of that information available? I might have missed it in the packet.
So some information is available on kind of yearly transit ridership. We are recommending in kind of the metric section that demographics of ridership be a metric that we pursue in the future. So I do not believe we have extensive information yet. Probably as you notice, a lot of these next steps are very high level, kind of like sentence descriptions. So there still needs to be extensive work to kind of build them out. But we wanted to have some more kind of guiding direction from other research and that has been done that can kind of help us have more specific action items to work on. But I can kind of similar to Mary's question, kind of follow up with Phil to see if we can maybe kind of compile kind of some more extensive data for you all to review.
Okay, Kay is next and then Polly. We can't hear you, Kay.
Thanks. I have a mute button on my mic here, so you can't see it up there. But I was going to say I do support what Polly's saying about, we do need to make a push for the train. Because yes, I do think the bikes and even the buses are very much a local within Longmont impact only. But yes, when it comes to the highways and all that stuff, I do look at the, that wonderful 2 months where the owls were everywhere in town all of a sudden. And, the air got so much clearer for some reason. And it was because people got off the road and started working from home. It was because the highways weren't getting filled. It was because there wasn't constant traffic in and out of town. I say, driving within town, I mean, I have friends who just cover every bike trail. It's great. I have a stepdaughter that at one point I made her take the bus for 3 months straight, and she learned that bus system like the back of her hand. She has apps for it. It's great. But she used it to get downtown and then into Boulder and back, and that was it. So yeah, I do support Polly's thought though that, no, I just tried Googling the Jared Polis and the Fast Tracks article, but Denver Post won't let me in, unfortunately. I'll find it later. But yeah, I was going to say that is something I think as a city we've done a good job, and Francie, you've done a wonderful job putting things together and kind of building them and doing what we can. I'll say this: it's easier to change what's within our city than to try and get Fast Tracks to finally give us the light rail we paid for. That is the harder route to take. And I don't know how much luck we'll have with it, but anyway, I support what Polly said on that. That's all.
Polly.
Polly's on mute.
Okay. I would also like to just add that mass public transportation is very much an equity issue, because it costs something like $10,000 to $13,000 a year to have a car. That's something that is like half of what people are on minimum wage are making. They can't afford to have a car. And when we don't have good transportation to Denver and other towns, it really limits the job opportunities of low-income people, and well, everybody, but especially who already have enough. So much of an economic equity issue in not having any kind of mass transportation outside of the city of Longmont.
Does someone want to email Polly and let her know that you didn't hear much of that and that she's gone now?
I'll let her know.
Yeah.
I was going to chip in and say, I think what she's talking about is again, just, by having mass transit within the city, only low-income people who can't afford the cars and the vehicles and can't take on that cost are only able to take the jobs within the city, which on the side also further feeds our housing crisis and all sorts of lovely things. And getting mass transit that can actually go to other places like Fort Collins, that could get people to Denver, opens up greater job opportunities for those people, is what I think her thought was, despite her breaking up. Sorry, your reception was terrible, Polly. And hopefully that's what I think I summed up what you were trying to say, maybe.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Jim, then Mary.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on behalf of somebody who doesn't hate the idea of faster buses. I work in Boulder, and I, for a lot of the time, will use buses to get between Longmont and Boulder, and there are a lot of headaches about it. But I also think that there's a ton of improvement to make it incredibly efficient and not a bad experience at all. And I want the trains and I want fast tracks. So I want it to be here. But I also think that I really do like that the plan addresses working with RTD and potentially even working with some of the large employers that people will often bus to, because I think that you could easily cut the bus travel time in half for people commuting in and out of Longmont with some relatively minor tweaks. So I just wanted to advocate on behalf of buses.
Thank you. Mary, Francie, do you want to comment her?
Yeah, I also realize Phil usually does this presentation, so I missed a point that I think is important. A lot of part of this roadmap, we wanted to try to pull a lot of different steps that are already happening. So a lot of the things that are highlighted are already in other plans, and there were some few additions. Like a lot of the embedding equity, we tried to add some more equity items, but a lot of the different items were things that were kind of already in process, and we wanted to try to get them all in one place so we can be a little bit more coordinated about it. So just wanted to provide that caveat to the plan.
I do have one quick thing that I wanted to add to this equity issue, which is that in the open forum, in the couple weeks back in January, there were a lot of folks expressing concern about low-income housing being built without parking spaces. And if we had the public transportation component, then we could credibly respond to that issue and say, folks will be able to get to jobs on public transportation, whereas now you can't make that argument that anybody can get to their job without a car at this time, regardless of your income.
Great. Thank you for that. Charles.
So I know I recused myself. This doesn't have to do with my electric vehicle investments, but for just clarification, Francie, what did vehicle transmissions mean?
So emissions directly from vehicles. So primarily that priority is primarily around either moving towards electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles. So like our renewable natural gas trucks that we use for our kind of waste services would be another example besides just the more common electric vehicles.
So was that a typo, or is that a term I just don't understand when it said vehicle transmissions?
It is a typo. It should say emission.
Okay.
So
got it.
Yeah, that's why I like tripped up when I was saying it, and I was like that. So thank you. I'll make sure we fix that.
I usually think of those as like my 8-speed transmission in my vehicle, but yeah, got it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Adam.
Yeah, I do have another broad question related to congestion and traffic and so on. I think at some level that's inextricably linked to population growth. And when I moved to Longmont, I remember reading on the news, it was like named one of the fastest growing cities. And so what I'm wondering is, are there any estimates for Longmont's current population growth rate and how that compares to its transportation capacity? And I'm also wondering if there's any projections for that maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, because I think if those are just way off, like we can make a lot of improvements in the transportation sector, but if it's just getting overwhelmed by the population, then it might be helpful to know that beforehand.
Yeah, I can jump in on that, Adam. That is part of the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan. Those projections for what's considered build out in the population growth are all taken into consideration. And the multimodal transportation plan, which is part of Envision Longmont, takes all of that into consideration when we look at transportation planning. Obviously, that's not my area in particular, so I can't speak to the details, but I can tell you that at least as far as information that we have currently, that is taken into account. Obviously, those are, our projections, and things can change, who knows yet what everything over the last year is going to impact population-wise and whatnot. But
Polly. We can't hear you.
Okay. I think that we are considered to be, we're at about 95,000 people now, and it's considered that when we reach 130,000, we will be at build out. So that gives you a little bit of a, but who knows, you know, and it depends upon how we build too. If we build more densely, of course, then we get more traffic and, you know, how it works.
Anyone else? Okay. So the ask, Francie, is for us to indicate support before you go to the city council. Is that, am I understanding that? And you're going to the city council in April?
Yes, the tentative, the date we're on the schedule right now is for April 6th.
Okay, so we can have this. So you're going to send out more information, right? And then we can we put this on the agenda for a vote on for next month's meeting? Does that sound good to everybody? All right. Thank you, Francie.
Quick question to Heather, just because if that's on March 17th, I believe that still gives us enough time to make any additions to the council packet before the 6th.
Yes, we would just need to have it, I think the following week to be able to still get it to them.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Great, thank you all for your comments, and I will send all those technical questions to Phil, as well as Tyler, who's one of our transportation engineers.
Thank you, Francie. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Okay. Oh gosh, I lost my agenda.
Can I make just one note? I noticed you all today have the ability to raise your hand, and this is the first time that's ever happened. That's a change in Zoom. And I need you to raise your hand physically rather than using the raise hand feature, because it doesn't get captured on the video for later on people watching. So if you would not use that feature, but continue the way that we've been doing it, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for that, Heather. Okay. Okay, next item on the agenda is electronic participation policy for boards and commissions. Heather, can you help me? Or
Sure. So we got notice from the city attorney's office that they would like for us to include this as part of our bylaws, this policy for remote meeting participation. We also learned that, during an emergency, we've kind of been doing it backwards. So now we need to adopt that policy to tag on to our bylaws. I also learned from the city attorney that moving forward, if we're not in a time of emergency, if somebody from the board wanted to participate remotely, they could, but they would not be able to have their privileges as a voting member. It would just be somebody from the public that they would be able to listen in to the meeting or whatever. But because we wouldn't be having the same situation that we have now, they would not be able to vote during that time. So just a little clarification on that piece.
okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't need to vote or anything.
We do need to, they asked us to include it as part of our policy.
Okay.
So we would need a vote for that.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to include that in our policy?
Can I make a motion that we all read it and that we discuss it next time? Like we just say we've read it and we can make the motion then? I feel strange making a motion on something I haven't read.
That is reasonable. Yes.
I agree with that.
Yes,
Yeah, I agree with Mary.
Big packet this week. So as I'm scrolling, going, hold on.
I kind of like how we're just putting off all of our decisions till next time.
We're putting off everything till next month.
That's right.
All right.
Just to make a comment, this is something that it's kind of boilerplate from the legal office just because of the emergency. And so it's just something every board is being asked to do, but you can put it off, I guess, till next month too.
Well, it's our due diligence for the due diligence.
So I would just like to ask that if we send it out in next month's packet again, if you would please make sure that you read it because it was included in this month's packet. So that's part of the reason we're doing the packets is to try to make these meetings more efficient instead of like putting them off every month. So just if we could do that, that would be helpful.
Can I offer, it's a relatively short section and I'm happy to read it if folks are comfortable with that they can digest it that way, or would you still prefer more time to digest after it's read?
We have 19 minutes left. Can we? And we've got a bunch of items.
I was going to say it is probably very standard, and it probably is more about us just making sure we understand that there has been a change to the bylaws as opposed to us making and requesting changes to it. So I would be willing to actually move forward and say I will do a thorough review so I understand where we are going forward. But yeah, I would say it's 2 pages.
But the electronic participation is like a paragraph.
Is it?
Oh, maybe not. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what I'm reading. Okay, sorry. You're right. It is longer than I thought. Okay.
But again, I don't think it's something that we are going to be able really to adjust. This is a city board. This is the city policy. So I think it's more about just make sure that you guys review it after the fact and understand that, if they're understand basically what it means.
I'd like to make a motion that we all agree to read it and that next week we bring it up again and we all agree that we've read it.
No. Okay. So does that require a motion? Okay.
No.
Charles, did you have a hand up?
Oh, sorry. My cat's trying to attack me. I'm just trying to stay out of his way.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Everybody, please read your packet next time and come prepared to talk about this. The next item is the Button Rock Preserve Management Plan update.
Yep, so that's just a really quick item that is just a piece of information to be passed along from Danielle Levine, who came to you all. She's been to you a couple of times. She came to talk about the Button Rock Management Plan before COVID, and then she came to you all in August, I believe, with a brief update, and she just wanted me to pass on this information that at that time she talked to you about that they were planning to cancel the special permit requirement for fishing at the Button Rock Preserve, making it so that only anglers needed a permit beginning in 2021. They had hoped all of that would be completed in December, but because of COVID, like so many other things, got extended into 2021. And due to that, the fishing permit will remain in place through the end of 2021. So she wanted me to pass on that information and let you all know that if people had additional questions, to contact her directly. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Mary, I think you have an item for us.
I do have an item, and the board charged me with putting together, structuring our inquiry about pollinators and pesticides. And so I did a little research, and I called and spoke to a local expert, and it literally would take me a minute to just give you my report back in a slide share. It would be better if Heather shared it from your end, but I could also, if I was given the ability to share my desktop, I could just do it that way.
Give me 1 minute and I'll get it pulled up here.
Okay. So remember, this is just my report. This is just my report back. This isn't saying this is what I think we should do. I'm just going to tell you what I learned. So I don't have to do anything. This is great when someone else handles the tech. I just have to say forward and back.
Yes, give me 1 moment.
It's one of the things I hate the most about Zoom calls is that you have to be your own tech person while you're speaking usually. Okay, I think that's presenter view.
This is the best I've got.
Okay, so basically, so we can just go on from this slide. So, what I've just structured the questions. What are the greatest threats to pollinators from pesticides in Longmont? If we wanted to take the two questions separately, folks, let me know, and we can do that. But I thought this would be the most efficient way to kind of structure the pollinator and pesticide question. Going on. And I came up with some ideas for how, what kinds of recommendations a board like ours could make about how to deal with this. So here's some recommendations. We could recommend that to the city council that the city departments have policies and staff initiatives to reduce or change pesticide use, that there be education programs across the city, local ordinances or restrictions on use, and recommendation of organic options, intergovernmental collaborations, collaborations with environmental groups like our local People and Pollinators Action Network, and then legislative agendas and, working with entities like the Leagues of Cities and Towns. So those are some potential ways that we could go. On to the next slide. I did interview beekeeper Tom Theobald, who's a recognized expert on neonics. He did sue the EPA and partially win, and there's some resources if people want to get familiar with what Tom has to say about neonics, which came up everywhere as the biggest pesticide threat, which we may or may not decide we want to focus on. Next slide. Tom recommended that David Bell, who is our Director of Parks and Natural Resources, is really up to speed on this issue, and he would be a good person to bring in, and that our board could support him in designing and recommending internal and external policy, both for the city facilities and operations itself, and as potential recommendations to the residents. And then I spent some time looking at the People and Pollinator Action Network. There's a local branch, and this is an issue that there is some concern with. The PPAN folks are working with the city in a collaboration to put in a pollinator-friendly fields along Route 119, and it was recommended that those areas, the soil be tested because the neonics are considered legacy, long-lasting pesticides. It's very hard to get rid of them. And if you don't test the soil ahead of time, even if the seeds are clean, you can create killing fields for the pollinators. And we could also use our public education programs that already exist as a resource. Next slide. And it's very important that we should connect with the USGS to find out about what's happening in terms of testing for pesticide levels and what they recommend and how we can support that. Next slide. Everyone talks about neonics. Everyone's really concerned about this. And here's some of the reasons. You guys can read this later. But the question keeps coming up, if we get rid of neonics, what's next, what's worse, and how do we insert ourselves in this agenda? And then I just go on, next slide. I just came up with, I just put in some of the most interesting biblio that I ran across as I was learning about this. So after this research, my recommendation would be that we bring in Mr. Bell, PPAN, and we talk to the USGS as a way to sort of get an overview of at least the neonic issue, if not the other issues involved with the pollinators and pesticides. But this board can go any direction it wants to go with it that it wishes, and I will go on mute.
Polly, and then Adam.
So Colorado, as you know, has been it's $32 billion in agriculture. So many chemical companies, but also agricultural people have put a state preemption on what we can do with pesticides. That no longer seems to be as useful as or as sensible as it once was. And there is in the state legislature this time going to be a vote on whether we eliminate the state preemption on municipalities being able to ban things. And I know that some municipalities have banned neonicotinoids and various other things like Roundup. So that's a possibility, but I just wanted you to understand that. And CML, which is the Colorado Municipal League, which advocates for all the municipalities in Colorado, is on board with that. So I just wanted to get a state perspective on what's going on in the state. But David Bell would be terrific. And of course, Tom is Mr. B.
Mr. B, right. Yeah, Tom had mentioned that that was likely going away and that cities were doing the bans anyway in anticipation of that, Polly.
Yeah, and also the Bee and Pollinator Association or whatever, they're around the city, and they do distribute seeds for bee-friendly things, but it's actually very easy to look this stuff up yourself. That's what I plant too. You know, those are native plants and they grow very well here. So plant a lot of echinacea, plant a lot of gaillardia, whatever. But thank you, that's a good report.
Well, it's just an introduction to our inquiry. And would people like me to just make the recommendation that we bring in David Bell and Tom and that somebody from the USGS and to answer the questions that I've outlined here? Is that good enough?
Well, I think we need to get buy-in from staff before we need to know when we can fit these folks in. And I neglected to say thank you for putting that together. That was great.
It was just my notes.
But it was really informative. I appreciate the work that you put into that. We've got Adam and Kay who both have something to say before we make any recommendations.
Do I go? Okay. Yeah. Thanks again, Mary, for putting this together. It was very informative. I just would like to ask a clarification question. Is the focus more on mitigating risks from pesticides, or does it also include planting native plants like what Polly was saying, and not just along 119, but all throughout Longmont?
However this board wants to go. If we want to request that staff and experts advise us on that as well, I highly recommend that we do so. However, it's very intimately connected to the pesticide use because these legacy pesticides, these forever pesticides don't break down, and you can plant on top of a ground that has glyphosate and neonics in it, and you're doing your plants and your bees a grave disservice because it will make them, tiny amounts will continue to make them sick for many bee generations. So they're very closely connected.
That's so sad.
Can I go? I want to get the question in before it's time. I guess my thought is, and by the way, that was an awesome presentation, so thank you. I'm over here Googling it on the other screen, but I do want to ask what direction you are looking to go with this. What is the end goal that you're hoping to achieve by having them come in? And I mean, because I would love to learn more about it, but again, I don't want to take the board to just be my personal learning opportunity on how I can better my garden. But is your goal to get a ban within the city for products? Is your goal to get the city to initiate a soil sampling and testing program around town? Is your goal to, is your goal to push the landscape department and the construction departments to include these in their whatever bids or designs? That's my question to you, is what is your end goal? And then also the last question would be is, Obviously there's a city boundary, and then there's kind of an unincorporated Longmont-ish, Boulder County-ish boundary. And once you step across a certain line, you are very heavy in agricultural territory. And what is the impact to those guys based on whatever policies would be generated out of this?
Well, Kay, I think we need an overview so we can answer those questions. I'm not recommending any particular policy. However, I might have skipped one of my slides. At least the neonics are having very grave impacts on birds and invertebrates, and they're considered, their effect is irreversible in animals, including mammals, including humans, and cumulative, according to some researchers. So I think we need the overview. And then we can make recommendations from there, since our job is to become educated and then make recommendations. So I'm asking for an overview kind of presentation at this point, which, if we read all of those links and do some own research, maybe we need less of that, but that's what I'm recommending. And the folks that I recommended could help with that, could definitely give those overview presentations.
Okay. Thanks.
I would be supportive of an overview and learning more about this and what we might be able to do to help with the bee crisis.
Yep. Jim.
Yeah, I think I kind of like how Kay outlined a couple potential avenues forward where we could actually have some deliverables from this. I think that's a good idea. I think knowing what kind of having the city parks manager talk about what is currently policy, and that's another good idea. And I also would be very interested in knowing, kind of making sure that we're distinguishing between native pollinators, which are native, and honeybees, which are not, and which are an agricultural crop, and making sure that although they are important, they can often outcompete native pollinators for resources. And so making sure that what we're doing kind of has a bent towards improving native species.
James, Tom Theobald is an expert in mason bees and other indigenous bees and their favored crops.
Yes, Lisa.
So we're about at time. I just wanted to remind folks, I don't think you all need to vote on this, because I think that you did put this on kind of the radar of things that you just tasked Mary with coming up with some questions. So I'm happy to pull that together for a future agenda meeting, in that there's also a strong tie with the water conservation component, because a lot of those pollinator friendly vegetation species and stuff are also our xeric plants and our water conserving plants. So we might look at bringing those two things together, because I know water conservation is a topic also that we're focusing on. And to just put in a plug for the Garden in a Box program that should be coming out pretty soon here, that Francie can give you more of a date, but they have specifically pollinator friendly gardens that you can order that are all put together, and it's a really phenomenal program. So if you all aren't aware, put that on your radar, and you'll be getting more information about that as we have it available.
March 1st is when gardens go on sale. And if you know anyone participating in Longmont Cares, we do now have a 80% discount for Longmont Cares participants to make it more accessible to all households.
Lisa, could you just tell us maybe next month when that presentation, or when our study session on pollinators and pesticides has been scheduled for, which month of 2021, if that's possible?
Yeah, I'll look at the calendar. Like I talked to you all about last time, we're trying to do a little bit of this like flexible scheduling to leave space to bring on things as we know that they're coming in front of council, so that you all have an opportunity to weigh on specific things. And these kind of potentially standalone items are a little bit more flexible, that I can move here and there. So if I have a better idea of when that might be, I will let you know, but I also want to maintain that flexibility so that you all have the most impact in terms of your advisory capacity to council.
If Heather could send my presentation to everyone, we could have the benefit of those links. That would be great. Also, Tom Theobald is not going to be available beyond the next couple months. So the sooner the better in terms of his schedule.
Okay. Thank you for that. Again, that was great. And I'm excited to learn more. Okay. Are there any items from the council, Polly?
Still doing flood mitigation, and now we're doing plague mitigation. So those are the two main items that.
All right.
But, and many other things, trying to get affordable housing and blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Thanks, Polly. Heather.
Just one note, we had mentioned last month about the new board members orientation that had been scheduled for February. Because of a board meeting conflict that was that day, they did reschedule it for March 1st. I believe you should have all gotten an email about that, but just wanted to bring that up again. So
thank you.
I would encourage you to go if you can.
Thanks. Okay, there were some informational item attachments in the board packet. I would encourage everyone to go ahead and read those as well. And unless anyone has anything else, I would love to hear a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thanks,
Aye.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.